Okay. Here are the first candidates to give their 3-minute opening statement. We're going to start with the 8th District. And the first person up by using drawing is Mr. Carson. Now, okay, do you get, they get this mic. Okay, I'm going to ask people to stay, because if we walk back and forth, we're going to spend all night.
Sit down.
Well, you can stand. But...
Yeah. Thank you. No worries. Good evening, guys. Folks, we as a nation, as a people, face a number of serious problems today. But we can't even begin to address these problems if we continue to pretend that they don't exist. If we continue to allow our politicians to get away with kicking the can down the road for another year, another election cycle, another generation. Is it scary to face these problems head on? You bet. Almost $18 trillion in debt. Deficits averaging close to $1 trillion a year over the past decade. Insolvent and underfunded entitlement programs to the tune of many more tens of trillions of dollars. How about the fact that taxpayers just this year will spend close to $250 billion on net interest on that $18 trillion of debt? And that's just the fiscal side of the house. Of course, it's scary. Of course, it's easier to pretend that all of this is somebody else's problem, that this mess is somebody else's responsibility to clean up. Of course, it's easier to vote for politicians that tell you that debt and deficits don't matter, that tell you that printing money out of thin air is a good idea, and that stealing money from our kids by spending money today we don't have and putting the tab on them is acceptable, simply because our kids aren't here to put up a hand to say stop. Our spending problem is a scary one, as is our meddlesome, haphazard, and dangerous interventionist foreign policy, our failed and unconstitutional drug war, NSA domestic spying programs, militarized police forces, the erosion of our civil liberties, the ever-strengthening pull that special interest groups seem to have on our political process. I could go on. The bottom line is this: do you want someone representing you in Congress that's willing to stand up and take these very difficult issues head on? Do you want someone that's willing to tell you the hard truth, no matter what the political ramifications might be? Do you want someone that's willing to fight the good fight, day in and day out, for each and every one of you and your kids? Yes? Good. Then you've got yourself a candidate. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Blay.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me? How are you all doing tonight? Oh, good. Thank you for coming out. My name is Jerry Blaze, and I am your independent Green Party candidate for Congress. I'm a former U.S. government intelligence analyst and a current corporate IT professional, and a lifelong Nova resident. I'm seeking to advance a number of goals that may initially sound a bit kind of crazy, but which I hope by the end of the night we can all agree on. For instance, I'm seeking to legalize all drugs and by extension, end the drug war. I'm seeking to end our wars of military choice and aggression abroad. I'm seeking to make available single-payer health care and free higher education for all. I'd like to vastly improve public transportation, especially trains. I'd like to open the borders to all non-felons of any nationality who wish to work here or reside here. And finally, I'd like to eliminate the income tax on the first $100,000 of income for every American. I welcome your questions and hope by the end of the evening that we can all agree on these goals. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Mr. Edmund.
Thank you. Well, that was literally short and sweet. I'm impressed. Well, I want to make this short and sweet myself, so I will tell you, my story starts here in Virginia about 16 years ago. I started my career out of college as an investment banker and wanted to do something to lead and be known as a pragmatic problem solver and get involved in public service. I could think of no better way to do that than being a United States Marine. So I came to Virginia 16 years ago to be a Marine Corps officer. I spent 8 years in the Marine Corps. I did half of my time overseas deployed, and I spent my last tour here at the Pentagon. When I got out of the service, I decided I still wanted to be very much involved, and I was very concerned about the issues, in particular our men and women in uniform. So I went to work on the House Armed Services Committee, Veterans Affairs Committee, and afterwards I went out into the private sector and started a business. And then after that, I got called back into public service. Really wanted to do something to make a difference. Pragmatic problem solving. A lot of people talk about it, very few people do it. I was a Republican staffer, but when the Obama administration was looking around for the very best to put someone on the Simpson-Bowles Commission that was going to help us figure out how we're actually going to come up with a balanced budget and solve all of these fiscal problems and be the senior defense advisor, they asked me if I wanted the job. And a lot of Republicans that said, don't take it, you know, it's Obama, it's Democrats, this and that. And I said, nonsense. When I went to serve my country as a Marine, I didn't care who was in the White House. And if we have a president that seems to be serious about wanting to solve these problems and ask someone to step up, I'll do it. So I went to the commission, spent a year working on these problems. Sad thing was at the end of the year, we had men and women that wanted to talk politics, and they weren't serious about standing up for the bipartisan solutions that senior advisors like myself have put on the table. A year later, Congress decided that they wanted to actually do something again. So we stood up what was called a Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction. Some people call it Super Committee for short. Ironically, it wasn't super at all. At the end of the day, same thing. We have a lot of individuals like myself who are appointed to these positions to come in and advise members of Congress on, no joke, these are the numbers. These are the hard choices. At the end of the day, you have to write a budget, make priorities about where you stand, and come up with a long-term vision. That vision has to be something about creating equal opportunity and making the American dream achievable for all people. We put those things on the table, and once again, these men and women chose not to act. This time, there was a penalty. This time, by not acting, they triggered sequestration. So when sequestration went into effect last summer, I decided I'm going to get into this race and be that individual that's going to actually stand up and campaign and be a voice, but a vote to enact all those hard, tough choices that we put in place so we can make the American dream achievable. Thank you very much. And then to create equal opportunity. So I look forward to your questions tonight about how we can actually solve that. Thank you.
Good timing. The next speaker is Miss Beck.
Hello, thank you very much. Can I come out from behind the podium and talk to everybody? My name is Gwendolyn Beck. I'm fiscally responsible, socially inclusive, and I believe we need a strong national defense. I'm running as an independent. Ask yourself, how do you feel about Congress today? How are we going to solve the problems? How are we going to get the business done of the United States of America? Right now, it doesn't matter how good your resume is. If you're a Republican, you're a Republican. If you're a Democrat, you're a Democrat. There are no independents in the House of Representatives. And the two factions are fighting against each other to the point where it's dysfunctional. And we all realize it. The simple things that they promised us, they have not done. Fixing the corporate tax rate. They're trying to make the budget so it makes more sense. But where are they getting the money? They're getting the money from student loans. They're getting the money from seniors. They cut into the military pension. Okay, it was 1%, but shouldn't this be sacred? Shouldn't a promise be a promise? We have to protect our seniors. I'm studying gerontology at George Mason University. I also have a business background. I have a full career in tourism, and I was manager of national sales for Eastern Airlines. And when Eastern ceased operations, I went into the financial world, and I started in U.S. government debt. So I do understand the debt. I understand that this is a situation that needs to be fixed, and it needs to be fixed fast. We have some very serious problems. But in the meantime, so we're fiscally responsible, but what's happening is we're getting caught up in the social issues. So I personally am socially inclusive. My mother and my aunt and my grandmother fought hard for women's rights, and I think we need to keep our rights, especially our right to choose what to do with our bodies, and we deserve equal pay. I know what it feels like to have the guy working next to me making more money than I am, and I am doing the exact same job. I know what it feels like to be downsized and laid off. One time I worked for a corporation, they accidentally laid off all the women. And they came back to me and said, oh, gee, that was an accident. I mean, this is something that we need to fight for. I also think we need to fight for marriage equality. So when I say socially inclusive, I mean I have respect for everyone. And I think there's certain groups that we really have to champion and other groups that need to be brought along. So I also think we need a strong national defense. And we see this today. We just came out of a war, as everybody knows, for so long. And now we have one of the most evil terrorist operations in the world that has emerged. And they have threatened to come here. And it's something that we really need to pay serious attention to. And so please take a look at me. Come on the website. I look forward to your questions. We're using the color hot pink. I'm an independent, so I have no illusions about not being the underdog. So we have a greater cause. We do have bands, and hot pink is dedicated to cancer awareness. My mother died of breast cancer, so that's the dedication of the campaign. Thank you very much.
The next speaker is a proxy for Don Beyer. It's Barbara Favola.
Thank you. I know some of you because my state Senate district goes from Arlington all the way to Loudoun, so I pick up portions of McLean and all of Great Falls, and of course 6 precincts in Loudoun. So anyways, it is my pleasure to be here. I am filling in for Don Beyer, and I'm sorry that you won't have a chance to see him this evening. He had a long-standing commitment. He is really quite funny and I think very clever. You probably won't get that that level of cleverness from my remarks, but I'll try hard. I'll try hard. Don Beyer understands quite well that we're really in a challenging time, and 16 million Americans are unemployed. He believes we need to build a new economy. He also believes that to do that, we need to invest, and we need to invest in our human capital. Don Beyer has said many times that he really believes universal preschool is one of the best investments we can make. He believes we should have high core standards for our K through 12 around the country. He also believes that families need a complete safety net. When he goes to Congress, he is going to fight to ensure that the Affordable Care Act does remain on the books. 8 million Americans, working Americans, are now insured through the Affordable Care Act. It may not be perfect, but it certainly has been a benefit to many, many people, and many of us in this room, because our insurance premiums won't go up now that more people who were previously uninsured have insurance. Don will fight for a woman's right to choose. He has just been a stalwart on that. He also feels very passionately about climate change, and there aren't many folks who are willing to take that on. It's a complex issue, but it's a real issue, and we have to do something about it. And he's willing to both advocate for policies and to come up with strategies where each and every one of us can make a difference. What else can I tell you? Lastly, but which is very important to me, and I think to some of you, Don Beyer will fight for common sense gun control. He's not going to listen to the NRA. He's going to listen to folks who have some sense about, yes, you have a right to own a gun, but we also have rights on the other side. Our children have a right to be safe in schools. And he will find that middle ground. I am very confident. So without further ado, I will just conclude. I have 15 seconds. Don Beyer has served for 8 years as lieutenant governor. He has also served us as ambassador several times. He chaired the transition group for the Department of Commerce under President Obama. He has had a lifetime of public service. Thank you.
Okay, that was the 8th district. Now we are going to do the 10th district. The first person to speak for the 10th district is Mr. Redpath.
Good evening. I'm Bill Redpath. I'm the Libertarian candidate for U.S. House of Representatives in the 10th Congressional District in Virginia this year. First of all, a little about me. I have been a resident of Virginia for 29 years, since 1985. I have a bachelor's degree from Indiana University and an MBA from the University of Chicago. As a civilian, I am a business appraiser. That is my profession. I'm a certified public accountant in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I'm also a chartered financial analyst, and I have business valuation designations from the American Society of Appraisers and the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. I have been a candidate several times in the past. This is actually the 6th time I've been a candidate for public office. I was the Libertarian candidate for governor in 2001, for U.S. Senate in 2008, and I ran for this office, 10th District, U.S. House, in 2010. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for inviting me to participate in this forum. It's a great crowd this evening. By far, this is the largest turnout of any of these fora because not all organizations have treated me as nicely as the League of Women Voters and AARP and the various co-sponsors. I have been excluded, as has Diane Blay and Brad Eicholt. I was excluded from the Fairfax County Chamber of Commerce debate. We were also excluded from the Loudoun County Chamber of Commerce debate. And that's too bad. Of course, I grieve most for myself with that exclusion. And it's too bad because the Libertarian Party, of which I am the nominee, is a party on the move. This year we have a candidate, Robert Sarvis, who was our candidate for governor last year. He turned right around. He's a candidate for U.S. Senate this year. And we have 7 candidates for U.S. House on the ballot in Virginia this year, and that is a record for the Libertarian Party of Virginia. The Libertarian Party across the nation has achieved over 1 million votes for U.S. House of Representatives in 6 of the last 7 U.S. House elections. Before that, any other third party, the last time any third party had achieved that before the 6 out of 7 streak by the Libertarian Party was back in 1912. Also, Libertarian Party candidates this year will probably set a record for top of ticket votes. What is top of ticket? Top of ticket is governor if there's a governor's election, U.S. Senate if there's not a governor's election. In the District of Columbia, it's mayor, and there are 5 states this year that have neither a governor's election nor a U.S. Senate election, so it's different offices. It's Secretary of State in Indiana, for instance. It's U.S. House of Representatives in Washington State. In the entire history of this nation, other than the Republican and Democratic parties, no party has ever earned over 1.5 million votes for top of ticket nationwide in a midterm election. Well, this year it looks as if the Libertarian Party isn't just going to cross 1.5 million. It looks like we're going to achieve over 2 million votes for top of ticket, setting a record for any third party in the entire history of this nation. I'll answer questions on specific issues during the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Mr. Faust.
Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be here in the McLean Community Center where we've spent so many nights together and working with the MCA and so many other organizations that take advantage of this wonderful building. I want to thank the sponsors. This is a great opportunity, and I want to take advantage of it to share with you my thoughts on why I should be your next congressman. As many, I think we would almost all agree that Congress is broken. It's dysfunctional, hyper-partisan. There's just a total inability to get things done and move our country forward. That is not acceptable. And as a member of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, I point with pride to the way we do business in Fairfax County. We come together, we solve problems, we work across the aisle, we get things done. And that's the type of approach I'm taking to Washington. You know, in Fairfax, we have had a lot of fiscal challenges. I serve as the vice chairman of the Budget Committee. Over the past 7 years, we've dealt with some very serious fiscal issues, but we came together fiscally responsibly and have balanced 7 budgets. As chairman of the Audit Committee, I found millions of dollars of ways to make the government more efficient, ways to reduce cost. And as chairman of the Economic Advisory Commission, I have worked with businesses in the community to keep our economy strong so that we can have the jobs we want, but also so that we can continue to have the wonderful services we have in Fairfax County. So when I ran for re-election, I won every single precinct in the district and 61% of the vote. I tell you that because I think it demonstrates that I am the guy who can work across the aisle and work with everybody. Congress, well, let me say that we need a functioning Congress. There's no question about that. It's holding us back. We need to create jobs and opportunities in this country by investing in job creators like infrastructure and education, research and development. We need to focus on education because it is the most important asset we have as a community going into the 21st century economy, which we all know is knowledge-based. We need to focus on universal early childhood education, need to focus on STEM education in K through 12, and we need to make college more affordable. And climate change is a huge challenge. We have to address it, but we also have to realize that it's a huge opportunity. We can create a whole new industry and a lot more jobs if we focus on it. So I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm looking forward to your questions, and thank you for being here.
Our next speaker is Mrs. Blay.
Hi, I'm Diane Blay of the Independent Green Party. And my web page is on the Independent Green website, which is votejoinrun.us. And there are three mottos of the Independent Green Party. We want more candidates, less apathy. We want more trains, less traffic. And we want to be financially conservative, socially responsible. The Greens want a better world with peace and justice now and in the future. Most countries with democratic systems have green parties, and there is green representation in national, regional, and local levels in many of these countries. The first candidate for president of the Green Party of the United States was Ralph Nader, and he's now 80 years old and still going strong. GP.org, for thegreenparty.org, has a lot of information about the party, including its key values and platforms. One of our key values is nonviolence. We were against the war in Iran and Afghanistan and want no further military aggression there or in any part of the world. The U.S. Greens seek to bring a vibrant grassroots democracy to every part of the United States and believe that the United States winner-take-all voting system is fundamentally flawed. Our specific recommendations to repair the U.S. electoral system include proportional representation, which would allow representation by parties beyond polarized Democrats and Republicans, and provide a voice for citizens with alternative views. We are in favor of full public financing for federal, state, and local elections. We want no corporate donations involved in these elections, and these donations are often just a euphemism for bribes. These corporate donations are extremely detrimental to our country, and we need to do what's best for our country instead of what the large corporations and their lobbyists want. The Greens call for a radical shift in attitude towards support of families, children, the poor, and the disabled, with basic housing, nutritional, and educational necessities. Health care is a right, not a privilege, and we should have a single-payer universal health care system in our country. We want a reduced prison population and to improve our public transportation system. I am running for Congress because the United States can do so much better in so many areas, and I can lead us in that direction. I am honored to be the Independent Green Party candidate for Congress and would be honored to be your representative in Congress.
Our last speaker is Mr. Eichholt.
Thank you. Okay, just to warn you, just to make sure everybody's awake for the questions, I'm going to ask a couple of questions to the audience. One is a shout out the answer, and one is going to be raise your hand. So just be prepared for that so everybody's paying attention. First of all, I'd like to thank all the co-sponsors for this event and Echo Bill for allowing us to speak today. I used my introductory time at some of the other events to talk about who I am, why I'm running, and some of the major issues that I think we're faced with today, and also why I'm running as an independent. All of those videos are out on YouTube, so I encourage you, if you want to know those things, you can go out there and watch the videos and learn those. Today, I'm going to talk about a couple of issues that I think are the biggest problem with our republic today. So that's going to be the question. I want you to shout out, what's the biggest problem with our republic today? Okay, so before I ask that question, I'm going to say and remind everybody that we don't live in a democracy. We live in a republic. The people don't make the laws. They choose the people who make the laws. Okay, so somebody shout out for me, what's the number one problem with our republic today? Okay, the U.S. House was close. Okay, that's close. Our elected officials no longer are representing the views of the majority of Americans. And what is causing that? So, has anyone ever heard of the term gerrymandering? Raise your hand if you heard the term gerrymandering. All right, excellent. I asked a bunch of high school kids that today, and nobody knew what gerrymandering was. Apparently, they hadn't got to it yet. The act of the state legislatures carving up the congressional districts in order to assure that the same number of representatives from either of the two major parties continues to represent them in the future. It happened right here in Virginia, right here in the 10th district in 2010. The district during the census was found to be 52-48 Republican, which is way too close for the Republicans in the state legislature. So they drew up a map that carved out a bunch of Democrats into the 8th and I think the 11th district to make this district now 56-44% Republican. And our other opponent, who's not here, is clearly trying to ride that into office today. I think we need nonpartisan groups who write the congressional districts. It's the only way to assure that they are written solely to allow for the ease of voters, because the problem it causes is now the only time an incumbent is going to lose is in a primary election when they get challenged from somebody who's farther right or farther left than them. And that's polling our representatives, the House of Representatives in particular, polling it apart so no one's representing the middle. I got 15 seconds. My other issue is campaign finance reform. We need it, and we need it right now. We need to remove the appearance of impropriety from our elected officials. They might not be taking the money for their next election, but let's take that away. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We are now going to start with the questions. I just want to mention that our timers tonight are Sue Cowart and Steve Morrison up here. You can see their cards, and I can see their cards, and they can see their cards. Okay, we started with the 8th district on speeches. We're going to start with the 10th district on questions. So the first question is, Stephen Fuller, our local economist, says that Northern Virginia does not have as high a projected recovery rate as some other areas do. The two obvious reasons are that unemployment wasn't as bad here as it was in other areas. The second is the loss of DOD consultant contracts. What would you do to keep economic recovery up to speed? We're just going to start going down the table. So, Mr. Faust, you're first. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I serve as the chairman of the Fairfax County Economic Advisory Commission and have done so for 7 years. What we're focused on is, first of all, recognizing that government contracting, which has been hurt by sequester and other mistakes made in Washington, is probably always going to be our best or biggest economic driver. So we got to focus on maintaining and expanding government contracting. However, we also have to focus on diversifying our economy. We can't be too dependent on one industry. So we in Fairfax County are looking at such things as personalized medicine. at Innova. We think it's going to be a huge industry going forward. The question is, can we capture the jobs here in Fairfax? We're going to focus on education because we believe that in a 21st century knowledge-based economy, people with the skills will come to jurisdictions that have the highest quality of life, have such things as transit-oriented development, and have fantastic educational systems for their kids. The employers will follow them here. So these are things that we're trying to do. I think that focusing on education is important as the number one asset in the area. Focusing on transportation is important because to the extent we don't get new employers in this region, it is because of our congestion issues. So I would just point out that the empty chair, Barbara Comstock, did not vote for the transportation bill in Richmond. She voted to slash $620 million from the education, from state support for public education. These are the things that are hurting us in our economy.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're just going to go down the line, and I'm going to ask that the people whose question isn't the first question to do a minute and a half. Okay?
I think the sequester was bad policy because the members of Congress could not make the choice about what they were going to keep and what they were going to discard from the federal budget. They should have done that, so the sequester kicked in. That said, the sequester is the only thing really that has restrained government spending. I read Tom Donlan's column in Barron's this past weekend, and the entitlement programs, that's full steam ahead in terms of spending, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, but the discretionary spending had very small increases. Small increases in government spending are badly needed in Washington. I agree that the economy has to be diversified, but I do not think the sequester ought to be rolled back. We need more fiscal discipline, and if that's what it takes, unfortunately, then that's what we need. I would also say that diversity of the economy is going to be very important. I support pro-growth tax policies, including a flat tax, with the end of gift and estate taxes being a part of that, ending the double taxation of dividends and capital gains. Pro-growth, pro-saving, pro-investment tax policy is one of the best ways to stimulate the economy, not just here, but everywhere.
Thank you. Mr. Eicholt?
First of all, I refuse to accept the premise of the question. I'm going to represent the 10th District of Virginia, but I'm going to represent them in the U.S. House of Representatives. My job is not to make sure solely that the 10th District of Virginia is doing well. My job is to make sure that the country is doing well. So, to a certain extent, I don't accept that premise of the question. However, in order to improve the economic situation in the 10th District of Virginia, we got to do the same things that we have to do that's going to help the economic situation across the country. We got it, as Bill said, we've got to reform the tax system. I too am a flat tax person. We need to collect taxes fairly across the board. You take a flat rate, everybody pays the same percentage, no matter how much money they make, that's what's fair, and then we can all go and talk about what we're going to spend the money on. Second, we need entitlement reform, Social Security, and we also need to lower the size of our military. I'm not talking about spending less money per person, but we don't need 1.3 million active man army. We need to lower that number. And those three items, Social Security, Medicare, and defense spending make up 70% of the federal government budget. We got to fix it. If you're not talking about those three items when you're talking about balancing the budget, then you're not talking about anything. Thank you.
Ms. Blay?
Okay, I was just asked to explain who I am compared to my son. And we basically have a lot of the same ideas, but we're a little bit different too, so I don't know. But getting back to the question, the independent Greens work so hard trying to get transportation system, building more roads around the Beltway, They wanted to put in a train around the Beltway, and that would have connected like the Vienna Metro with the Springfield Metro. I think that's so logical, and that is one of the ways we want to stimulate the economy by investing in our people and to get them moving again and increasing public transportation.
Thank you. Mr. Blaze. Do you pronounce it Blaze or Blaze? Blaze.
So the question dealt with a loss in revenue from a drop in defense contracts. And this is probably a very unpopular thing to say in this room, but a loss in defense contracts is actually a very good thing. Those contracts existed because we were in a perpetual state of war. The fortunes people were making were built on the backs of dead Middle Easterners. It's a terrible thing. Those contracts should end. I enjoy the presence of that. I benefit. I have a top secret clearance. My salary is probably $25,000 higher than it should be because of the defense industry. But again, these things do need to end. If we want to stimulate our economy, let's legalize and tax all drugs. Let's release drug offenders and not pay to keep them in jail at a cost of $50,000 per inmate per year. Let's eliminate income tax on the first $100,000 of income so people will be able to spend more of their money. That'll be a massive stimulus. In short, if we can solve a problem with freedom, and if increased freedom offers the best solution, let's go with that. Thank you.
All right, the question, Professor Fuller. Actually, about 2-3 weeks ago, Professor Fuller was right here in the local area down at the Capital One Center giving a talk and a brief specifically on this issue. Did anyone actually make that brief? Yes, no? Well, he talked about two things which are the drivers for the revenue in Northern Virginia. One was obviously government spending, particularly defense contracting, and the other one was professional services. So when you look at those two things, and you talked about the declining curve and government contracting spending, then it became a challenge for the state to figure out what can you do to push up the revenue growth out of professional services. Quite frankly, that's the one where you want to focus on because those are the types of jobs that allow people to actually continue to live in this area because of the growth in expenses. So there are 2 to 3 things that you can do. One, first and foremost, is you have to keep your infrastructure grid up because that allows you able to import businesses and allows you to maintain the businesses that are here because employees can move around. It becomes a destination center. Right about now, we receive about 50% of our funds from the Federal Highway Trust Fund from the federal government, and Congress in its infinite wisdom decided to go out of session and not actually fully fund that. We need individuals that are going to go to Congress and actually focus on doing that. We actually also need individuals to focus on making investments in STEM education that's going to give the backbone here, making a qualified workforce, once again, being a place where businesses want to stay and also relocate. Those types of things are investments that we need. Thank you.
Sorry, too many people.
Thanks. Well, at the projected recovery, so I'm assuming that you mean from 2008, from the housing meltdown. We have pockets in the country that have performed much better than other pockets. I think this is one of the pockets that's done very well. And the question is, how do you keep it going? Infrastructure, obviously, there is the war dilemma. If we're not at war, we're not going to have the government contractors. So what do we do here? We need to invest in students, and I have a real problem with the student debt because Congress does charge what I consider a usury rate of 205 basis points over the 10-year note for student interest rates. And I think it should be a lot lower than that because we need our students to study math and study science and come to places like Northern Virginia that has a rich history of technological innovations. ARPANET was developed here, as most of you know, and so that's the precursor to the internet. And that was a huge boom. And we can look at our economy in the late 90s, and it just proves if we have something new, it's going to really help this economy. The other thing I think that Northern Virginia could do much better at is having tourism come to Northern Virginia. Alexandria does a great job. I think we could have more museums. We've got a nonstop flight now from China, and the Chinese spend an average of $5,000 a week, where a European will spend about $600 a week. So that's something that we can really focus on. And there's a lot of other great ideas, but I'm kind of up here late, so I almost feel sorry for Jeffrey.
Mr. Carson? Okay, please hold your applause.
Hi, guys. Again, Jeffrey Carson, the Libertarian candidate on this side. Let me just say first that I'm glad I'm on this side and not this side, because I actually obviously agree with what Mr. Redpath had to say, but I also agree with, what is your first name, sir? Brad, sorry. This guy is a smart guy. Okay. So the good news is I'm on this side of the house, right? And let me just echo that I agree that the premise of the question, I think, is way off. We're running for U.S. House. Yes, obviously, we have to be aware of our constituents' needs, but if every congressman goes to the Hill and says, okay, we need to do some things that are really tough, like reducing spending, like balancing the budget, but you first, right? That's what we see today, and it's obviously not working. So we have to think about this big picture. I am the only candidate in this race, actually, that intends to reduce spending on net, that is, reduce overall spending, and push very hard for a balanced budget amendment. In other words, I am the only fiscal conservative in this race, and it's not even close. Okay, again, why I'm glad I'm not in this race, and I'm glad I'm in this one. Two, when it comes to the macro level with our economy, there's several things we can do. One, and again, if you go to my website, you will see a section that says Day 1 Legislative Priorities. I've outlined them all here. Geez, that went fast. One, we need to reduce burdensome regulations and pursue better free market alternatives. And two, we absolutely need to dramatically simplify the tax code and end all forms of corporate welfare, period. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Now we're going to start with, the first question is going to be started on this side of the table and move down this way and then down this way. Okay. All right. This question is for Mr. Blay to start out with. What will you do to support older workers and stop discrimination of older workers? Mr. Blay, you've got 2 minutes.
Oh, sorry about that. Well, the support older workers is pretty obvious. If we eliminate income tax on the first $100,000 of income, if you can keep 40% more of your money, it's a pretty amazing bit of support. I think it's more than anyone else here is offering to do. In regards to stopping discrimination, if the company's discriminating against you because of your age, I would suggest you go to a different company. They probably won't appreciate you anyway. So I'm sorry, I don't think the answer is to coerce companies into hiring older people. I would encourage you to find another company. And again, I know that's unpopular, but I don't believe in coercing companies into things they don't want to do. I think in the long term, companies that ignore better talent, that ignore older, more talented employees, will fail of their own accord. And the companies that you do go to work for will succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. Specifically, I had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to go do one of these typical forums with NARF, National Association of Federal Retired Employees, and we discussed this question. What we do see is a graying out right now of our workforce, and there are a lot of individuals that are worried about some level of discrimination, early termination, if you will, and whatnot. This is what we see. There's an unparalleled comparison between older workers as well as those with disabilities, those individuals who feel like they're penalized in the tax code for working X amount of hours and then the difference. Things that I would like to see is us to use the tax code to bring more parity so that we can protect those individuals so that they aren't unfairly biased in the tax code with their employers. Another thing that I see is finding a way to protect their benefits. One of the things these individuals are doing is they're working an extra 5 and 10 years for the benefits because they're very uncertain. So one of the things is we can give cover in the tax code again, is making sure that any type of entitlement reform that we do, that they're grandfathered in if they're currently receiving the benefit, or if they're within 5 to 7 years of receiving the benefit. This makes sure that you give them some locked-in security. And another thing is, on the government worker side, is if they are reaching retirement age, is to make sure that they are allowed to reach their maximum retirement age if they want to, and that the replacement factor is done based on a skill set and not forced out. Thank you very much.
I would say don't applaud, but what else have we got to do in the minute? We have a minute and a half.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think there's two issues here. One is the issue of respect for the older worker. And then the other issue is going to be an issue of education. And I think the respect comes from our society, and it's something that we need to continue to work on. I think that older people have so much to offer, and it's certainly from an advice and wisdom point of view. And I think that education is also an important thing, because as there are technological changes, that there should be some form of education that is available to the older workers to make sure that they keep up with all the new innovations that are coming out. I know I have a 22-year-old campaign manager. I have 2 campaign managers. One is 22, and she's a whiz on the computer. And I think that if I'm going to keep up with that, I need to, go back and have training. And I think depending on the job you have is going to depend on how much training you need. And that's something that we can do in Congress. The other thing that we can do is work to pass laws that would ensure that everybody's pension is protected, and that they're, of course, again, treated with respect and get the education that they need. And one of the people I grew up with was Claude Pepper. And today, I don't see anybody in Congress who's really a champion for the seniors, and that's one of the reasons that I'm running. I've also known Bill Nelson most of my life, and he is on the Senate side, and he is very much a champion for seniors. So I will be there for the seniors.
Mr. Carson?
Thank you. Hi again. So, this is probably, it might be popular, we'll see. Here's my first hard truth of the night. Since '08, since the economic downturn, actually older workers have fared far better than younger workers. So, I know that's, the question doesn't maybe necessitate that, but that's actually a fact. And to answer the question, I have to sort of broaden it out. I don't think that the federal government should legislate preference for any group, to be perfectly honest, whether it's young, old, black, white, red, blue, it doesn't matter to me. Obviously, I agree that no employer should be discriminating based on any of these things. There's no question about that. But when you start trying to legislate that, you go down a very, very slippery slope. And in the end, really, you just add mountains of complexity costs for businesses, which end up making it more difficult for them to hire a total number of people, and it actually ends up harming the economy in the long run. Thank you. That's all I got.
Mr. Faust?
Thank you. In terms of discrimination, I believe any type of discrimination is unacceptable, whether it's age-based or sexual preference or orientation, whether it's race, color. It's not acceptable in the United States. So we need to ensure that our laws protect everyone from discrimination. And if we do that, we can get a good start on dealing with the discrimination side. In terms of helping seniors or older workers, there's a lot of things we can do. The number one thing, obviously, is to grow the economy and ensure that there's jobs and opportunity for everyone, regardless of your age. We can focus on, because of the knowledge-based economy, it is each of our responsibility to continue our education through our careers. And so we need to focus on growing and supporting our community colleges, which are probably the best source of professional training for people in the workforce. And we have to make sure we have good health care, a system that provides affordable and accessible health care. If we do those things, it'll be fine. Seniors will have a much better opportunity in the workforce.
Mr. Redpath?
Well, I would like to answer this question, but after hearing that $5,000 figure tossed out, I think I'm going to roll out early and start looking for a Chinese couple to adopt me. But in any event, seriously though, I question how big a problem this is, first of all. I agree with Mr. Carson. I don't think this should be addressed through legislation. But I think this problem is one that is not as big, will not be as big in the future as it has been in the past, in that we have declining labor force participation. I mean, people in the prime of their life, you look at the figures, men 25 to 54, we've hit the labor force participation rate is the lowest it's been in decades. I think that there's going to be real demand out there in the future for older workers by employers due to this low labor force participation. But I want to say one other thing. The legislation to address this may sound good, but one of the reasons I'm running is the U.S. is falling in terms of economic freedom. Just this week, a new Economic Freedom of the World survey came out. The United States used to rank second in economic freedom, just behind Hong Kong in the year 2000. Among all the nations of the world, we plummeted to 17th in last year's report. We popped up to 12 this year, but we didn't really get much better. It's because a bunch of nations ahead of us got worse. It's legislation like this that hurts economic freedom, which is the main driver of prosperity in this nation.
Good, you're getting the hang of this.
Thank you. Well, I agree with Mr. Faust and I agree with Mr. Redpath, and you know how that makes me crazy. Mr. Faust said discrimination, it should be ended throughout the United States for every class, and I obviously agree with that. Actually, age is a class that is free from discrimination, according to, pretty sure it's the 14th Amendment. So they shouldn't be discriminated against. If they're being discriminated against by their employer, then they already have the full right to sue. I agree with Mr. Redpath. I don't think trying to legislate putting in a new law is going to help without causing unintended consequences, like employers will have to jump through more hoops to make sure that they aren't discriminating against anyone, elderly or otherwise. I think that could be a problem. And I was going to say something else and I forget, so we'll let it go at that.
I think now if you're discriminated against, you can bring suit against somebody. I'm not terribly in favor of those things, but it is possible, so you can try to achieve justice that way. But for the older people, I think that so many of them are being volunteers, and and our society could use a lot more, so that's a thing that they could pursue too.
Okay. This week, New Yorkers Magazine reported that in the 2012 campaign, 100 people spent an average of $7 million apiece. That's a total of $730 million spent by 100 people to affect the outcome of the campaigns. Are you comfortable with this?
Yes, I think it's a good thing. I'm very serious about that. We spend, first of all, Americans spend collectively more on potato chips than they do elections. So, and I think that in the past, first of all, I think campaign finance laws are basically an incumbents racket. I mean, for people who, the devil is in the details. But I guarantee you, with Republicans and Democrats in the legislature, if there is financing legislation written, it's going to help them and it's going to hurt others. First of all, there are examples with initiatives and referenda where one side outspends the other 10 to 1, 20 to 1, and loses. You can look at the data. And I agree with Diane Blay on proportional representation and changing our election system. I do not agree with the emphasis on money. It is far from clear what effect money has in our political system. Additionally, I will also tell you about one person who could not understand why we would want to curtail campaign financing was the late Senator Eugene McCarthy. He said that in 1968, his insurgent presidential campaign never would have gotten off the ground if today's campaign finance laws had been in place. And so I think that rather than curtail freedom in this nation, and I'm not sure exactly what was accomplished by all that spending, And no doubt there were some people who emptied their wallet and were very frustrated with the results. Example A would be Meg Whitman running for governor of California 4 years ago. So no, I would not support laws that would curtail people's right to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Eichold?
Well, you certainly teed me up for this one. And in this case, I couldn't disagree with Bill Moore. I think we should have publicly funded campaigns. I think we need to take money out of politics. I've never spoken to one person who said that there's too much money being spent and there's not enough money being spent in politics. We need to completely take it away. If it isn't, and I started to say this at the beginning, if it is not direct bribery of a federal government official to contribute money to their campaign, when in fact every U.S. member of the House of Representatives is continuously running for the next campaign, every one of them will tell you, I got to start raising $15,000 a day in order for my next campaign. So you're telling me that the people who are then funding your campaign to keep you in office, that doesn't have any effect on the way that you vote. I think that if it is not bribery, it is the appearance of impropriety, and the people who run our country should be above that. They should be above the appearance of impropriety. We need publicly funded campaigns. We all spend the same amount, and then we have to talk about ideas. And you're only going to vote on me on my ideas and not how many ads I can buy bashing the other candidate. Thank you.
Well, if the candidates didn't work so hard trying to raise the money and spend so much of their life raising money instead of studying politics and the issues, okay, I would go with it. But instead, I know for a fact that many congressmen have afterwards come out of Congress and said they wish they hadn't had to spend all that time raising money, and yet they've gone along with it. I think you need to do what's right, and that's not right to spend that time raising money. You should be working for your people, doing, learning about the job.
Mr. Blaze?
So yes, there is a lot of money spent in politics. That said, how many of you are selling your vote? How many of you would vote differently if there was twice as much money spent in politics? Or 10 times as much? I wouldn't. I don't think the burden should be on the politicians to not accept money or to not donate money. The burden should be on the electorate to elevate their consciousness, to become more aware of the people they're voting for and the implications of the policies they support. That said, there is too much money in politics still. But again, I don't think we should coerce or regulate the problem away. Instead, let's vote for candidates who support what we believe in. For instance, if I'm elected, I'll take a salary of $40,000 a year. That's the median salary of an American. I'll take no more. I would like to be the change. And that's what we should expect of our candidates. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is that a lot of money being spent? Yes. Record totals. The question here is actually two, to be very specific about it. First question is the right to spend that amount of money. Supreme Court's ruled that you do. It's freedom. Citizens United. The real question then for us is if people have determined that spending that amount of money is right, then how do you regulate it? How do you regulate it responsibly so that you get at the intent for tying the voter to the actual politician, so you actually are represented? That real question lies in this right here. The campaign finance laws used to be focused more towards tying the individual voter to the actual candidate, and then they regulated that. And there were caps on the amount, but there were also a lot of these types of regulatory things on what can and how and when and whatever. We have now shifted to the opposite spectrum, which is pull the individual voter away from the candidate. Now what we have is these groups that are unregulated that can spend massive amounts of money that come into a district that are absolutely nothing to do with your candidate, your race, and your issues. So instead of actually having oversight and tying the closest relationship possible, making it more responsive to you, the voter, they're dealing with, in most cases, a lot of money that has nothing to do with your race. So that management function is something that we need to get back to. That's responsible, and that ties the voter back to the actual candidate. Thank you very much.
Ms. Beck?
I agree with Brad, 100%. Thank you, Brad. So I'm not going to repeat what Brad said, but I'm going to tell you, as a businesswoman running a campaign, it's actually surprising how little it takes to run the campaign. If you take out the steak dinners and you take out paying yourself a salary, which is legal, you can pay yourself the same salary you made the year before, and I think you averaged the last 2 years together. So look at the candidates that you're voting for. Are they paying themselves a salary? Eric Kanter spent $280,000 on steak dinners, which is the exact amount that his opponent spent on the entire campaign. So think about where the money is going. If you see these guys and women jetting all over the country, who's paying for that? You know, look at it, and it's very serious. I think we really need to take a step back and look at what the candidates are spending our money on. If we're donating $100 that's hard-earned money, are they fiscally responsible with it? Are they putting it in a place that makes any sense? Because money doesn't vote, people vote. And I'm with Brad, and I hope you'll send both of us to the U.S. House of Representatives, because there are no independents there, and I'm sure we could make a difference.
Mr. Carson?
Thank you. I'm with Brad, I'm with Bill. All right, I'm with Bill. And I'll tell you why. I don't believe the federal government should have any power to tell us what we can and cannot do with our hard-earned dollars, period. That's it. Now, public elections sound like a great idea. It sounds in theory like a great idea, but does anyone in here honestly think that the big boys still wouldn't figure out a way and loophole the law and make sure that money or resources or time or whatever you want to call it gets to the candidates that they want, you know, to get in office? I mean, let's wake up, right? It sounds great in theory, but I just don't buy it. I can tell you, as a third-party candidate here in this race, one thing it's been an interesting lesson for me, because it's very counterintuitive. As Bill touched on, you would think that these campaign finance laws level the playing field for the little guy. In reality, they do the exact opposite. Okay? All of those rules in place, and there are a plethora of them, right? I've got to figure out on my own. I mean, I don't have an army of tax accountants and campaign finance experts like Republicans and Democrats do typically to help them, do what they need to do and make sure they're crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's. In addition, trying to find 10, 15, 20 people that can all donate $2,600, almost impossible for a third-party candidate. Do you think Don Beyer, right, is going to have any trouble raising $2 million, whether there are laws about this much or that much or not? No, he's going to raise that regardless. But someone like me that could maybe get a $50,000 donation from one person, that could make or break a campaign. So just, if we level the playing field, it would be getting rid of these campaign finance laws. Thank you.
There's no question that we need campaign finance reform. It's just not the way our system was designed, to have a select number of very, very limited number of people being able to influence the outcome of elections across the country. Citizens United was a horrible mistake. Congress has to take action unless the Supreme Court overturns it. We're probably going to need a constitutional amendment, but it's that important. We cannot let the special interests and the super wealthy control our elections. And that's what's happening when they can spend hundreds of millions of dollars individually on a race. So I feel very, very strongly we need campaign finance reform. I think it has to be specific. I know I share the concerns. We don't want to be any more limiting with government than we have to. But believe me, if we don't come up with very strict restrictions, very specific restrictions, they will find ways to get around them. So we've got to attack this, and we've got to tackle it. And it's a very significant challenge that this country faces. Thank you.
Okay. It may not seem like it, but I have a very complicated system going on here. Okay, Mr. Edmund will get the next first chance question. History asks, if people knew what Hitler was up to, and some did, why did no one stop him when they could? ISIS has the stated objective of eliminating every Shiite Muslim on the face of the earth. What is the U.S.'s role?
Thirty seconds or less, right? All right. ISIS is a problem. How does the United States deal with it? Particularly, what's the U.S.'s role? First question is it a threat? Yes, it is a threat. Is it an immediate threat? Is it an existential threat? Debatable. I think Iran going nuclear is much more of an existential threat for the United States because it shifts the entire equation in the Middle East. But ISIS does pose a near-term threat for the United States, no doubt about it. What is our role and what should we do? Well, absolutely, I think Congress has to vote to give the president authorization to actually execute war operations, which are called airstrikes. Currently, the president's doing that without authorization from Congress, and I think that he should. I think that those strikes should take place in Iraq. I'm unclear about whether or not they should take place in Syria for specifics. One, in Iraq, we actually have negotiated a defined status of forces agreement with that country on how U.S. troops will be treated as they are in there, and we'll undoubtedly have to add a few more troops in there to what we have now. We currently have some. The Iraqi government actually has a new government in place that we have a relationship with. They have an army that's more defined, and they have more mutually agreed upon accepted borders. And they have actual economic interests that affect the United States economy because we are not energy independent over here. ISIS movements in the northern part of that country affect our economy. So for those particular reasons, the United States has direct national interests and we should be involved. The scale of that depends on how far we should go. And when you look at Syria, it's a completely different operation because all the simple factors I just outlined that make it okay to be involved in Iraq, all of those things are missing in Syria. And more importantly, when you look at Syria, instead of it being a country operation, it denigrates down into a civil war on the religious side. And when we go on one side, we elevate another side, whom we've also defined as actual another security threat for the United States. Thank you.
Ms. Beck?
It's a serious problem, not only for the other Muslims, especially for Christians, especially for Jewish people, and the way they treat women is deplorable. ISIS is going in, and they are walking up to people and saying, you join us, and you convert to Islam, or we're going to kill you. And they kill them. And if you're a Christian, they're going to burn down the church, and if you're lucky, they might let you leave, but they're probably going to kill you. These are the same types of people that shot Malala point blank in the head. They took the 200 Nigerian girls out of school and kidnapped them. We still haven't found them. And the women, the first thing they do is tell them to go home from school. There's now what they call a sex jihad, where they're telling the families that they have to send the young women to be with the soldiers. And it's absolutely deplorable. They're very, very evil and very scary. And there's not going to be any rights. And they have threatened to come here. They have done everything that they said they're going to do. And I think that we need to do everything in our power to stop them. And right now we have a serious vacuum of leadership. And we're going to need some strong leaders to step in. The bombings certainly don't look like they've worked. And this conversation goes on my website, on GwendolynBeck.com. We did a blog today on national defense, and please go and read it to get the rest of my views, because I'm out of time.
Thank you. Mr. Carson?
Thank you. I'm going to talk really fast because this is impossible in 1:30. First, former Army captain, Iraq vet, been to the region multiple times, first working with the Israelis on their missile defense, and then second as a ground liaison officer briefing fighter pilots who flew their close air support missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. I was on carriers. I did a few different things. I've also been back to the region as a civilian with a backpack for 2 months, backpacking through the region. If there is a foreign policy expert, particularly in the Middle East, I am it in this race. I will tell you this, there are no good options. Anyone who says that they've got it all figured out is either full of it or just doesn't really get it. There are no good options. All we have are bad options, really bad options, and then really, really, really bad options. Unfortunately, foreign policy leadership today and the administration is looking at the really bad options and the really, really, really bad options. Let's show of hands. Does anyone out there actually think that the strategy, the grand strategy in place today, which consists of airstrikes and partnering with the moderate Syrian rebels, who, by the way, just announced our plan to strike ISIS in Syria, has any shot in heck at degrading and ultimately defeating ISIS in 3 years? Did we not learn from, okay, we got 2 people, 3, okay. Did we not learn from Afghanistan with the Taliban 12 years, right? We still haven't defeated the Taliban. We had 60,000 troops there, over 100,000 troops in Iraq for the better part of a decade. Couldn't pull that off, but now we're going to do it. This is nuts. We need to get our troops out of the Middle East. We need to pursue a non-interventionist foreign policy. We need to stop risking our service members' lives for this nonsense. Thank you.
Mr. Faust?
Thank you. I believe the question, I think, was, what is the United States' role with respect to ISIS? And we have to destroy ISIS. I think that is an absolute. But we don't have to do it by ourselves. We need support of allies. We need to bring together the Syrian rebels. We need to get the Iraqis, the Kurds, the people who are on the ground, who are there, and we need to support them. But I don't think the United States should be committing the significant troops on the ground like we've done in Afghanistan, like we've done in Iraq. I think the way to solve this problem is to utilize the people who are there, whose interests are most directly at stake. But we have to support them. We have to support them with airstrikes, with logistics, with supplies. But they have to fight their own fight, and this is their fight. We're there to support them. Thank you.
Mr. Redback?
Well, I agree with what Jeff Carson just said. I would say, first of all, that our founding fathers decided wisely that going to war should be a committee decision, not the decision of one person. We are in a sad state if our president thinks that given the threat, we are not about to be attacked, as far as I know. Mind you, I don't get the intelligence briefings, but I cannot believe that we are about to be attacked by ISIS. And I know they haven't attacked us yet. They are horrible, despicable, reprehensible people, and I most certainly would not want to live in their society. But the United States, I don't know about you, but I'm kind of outraged when I see U.S. Navy commercials saying they're a global force for good. Or I see Marine television commercials on TV implying that it is the role of U.S. Marines to go to the aid of anybody in distress anywhere in this world. That's why we're going broke, friends. How much is this war going to cost? We already spend 43% of all military spending in the world. How about the allies? How about the people in the neighborhood? How about Turkey stepping up and doing something, for Pete's sake? We can't save the world. If we try, we're just going to go broke and harm ourselves in the process. The U.S. military is for the defense of this nation and the people and property in it, and it's up to the president to make the case that we are being threatened before we get involved any further in the Middle East.
I think it's a two-part solution, and people all too often forget the latter part. There is a military aspect to stopping ISIS because they're a military organization. So if we are going in to stop them from killing civilians, which is how we first got involved, there were thousands of people trapped on a mountain, and we stepped in to avoid their slaughter. To some extent, I disagree with Bill that you can't put a price on people's lives to say that, well, we're going broke, so sorry, you guys are just going to have to deal with ISIS yourself. Doesn't seem like the solution. But the solution is not a military solution. It's a political solution. The current government in Iraq, on the Iraqi side of the border, completely disregards the minority in the country. And that spawns groups like ISIS who feel like they're not being represented by their government, so how are they going to get past that? They're going to use force. We have to get the government in Iraq to respect the minority rule. And that goes across the Middle East, to be perfectly honest. But if we continue, we cannot get involved where we are on one side of the Sunni-Shia battle, because it will only turn out bad for us. Thank you.
Ms. Blake?
Getting anybody in other countries to do anything is difficult. And you have to think, why are we hated so much? And it is partly because we've been over there fighting for so many years of our drones, of our militaristic position in this world. So we just need to come back to our country and invest in our country. And it's a terrible thing, but we can only do so much in this world. So.
Ahlan, ana ismi Jerry. That's me introducing myself in Arabic. Salam, Jerry Blaze hastam. That's me introducing myself in Persian Farsi. The US government paid for me to study both these languages in the course of my duties as an intelligence analyst. So I've looked at the intelligence regarding the Middle East. We talk about going with airstrikes. Airstrikes, they're not what Fox News or CNN tell you they are. They really mean killing people, a lot of people, always women, always children, wedding parties. Sometimes you kill militants, but of course that's very easy to do when you define a militant as any fighting age male. So it's unlikely to solve anything by getting involved. Is there any recent counterinsurgency success in recent history that any of my opponents can point to who support intervention? There isn't. This isn't something we're capable of doing. And just to provide context, ISIS, they're a regional actor with regional capabilities. You are all more likely to die in a car accident on the way home tonight than to be killed by ISIS in your lifetime, or, of course, till the end of your lifetime when you die. Thank you very much. Bye.
Okay, this question will start with Mr. Eichholt. This question is, I'm concerned about Congress's lack of willingness to pass a budget. We cannot continue funding the government on continuing resolutions. What are you going to do to help get a budget to pass and prevent another government shutdown like we saw last October?
Well, as the only independent in the House of Representatives, unless we get my friend over here elected as well, I think it would be idealistic to say, yes, I'm going to go in and I'm going to solve the whole Republican-Democrat problem. That's as idealistic to say as we're going to go and solve Iraq and Syria. That doesn't make any sense. However, I do think that the two parties have stopped talking to each other. I think if something comes from one side of the aisle, it is immediately dismissed from the other side of the aisle. I'm a project manager. My job is to talk to people who don't speak the same language and try to build some consensus and find out where we need to go. Typically, it's government employees and technical people, and those two groups generally do not speak well to each other. However, I was raised a Republican. My parents are Republicans. All of my family cannot believe my stance on social issues because I'm socially liberal. So I do speak on both sides of the aisle, and I think I can build some consensus. I think we need to focus on areas where we agree. I think passing a federal budget sounds fantastic. I think that's going to be difficult for the time being. I think we need to focus on areas we agree and move on from there and try to build the two parties back together. Thank you.
Since it's all Republicans and Democrats and one independent, it's a tough situation, but I just think I am so wanting to hear from other people. I want building a community, a teamwork effort. I think that's what needs to be done.
The Iraq war has cost $3 trillion and counting. Every inmate in a federal prison is costing us $50,000 a year. Does anybody really support these things? Do you want more war? Do you want more innocent, nonviolent drug offenders locked up? These are solvable problems. We can stop going to wars in foreign countries. We can stop locking up nonviolent people in prisons. If you think about it, locking someone up who's a nonviolent criminal, really, if there is no victim, there is no crime. It's a stretch to even call that person a criminal. But it is modern day slavery to put someone in a cage against their will, to tell them they can't leave when they haven't hurt anyone. So we can, by doing the right things, we can solve our budget crisis by not going to war, by giving people freedom. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Solving the problem. First, I guess you have to define what the problem is. It's true, we rarely do an annual budget anymore. Congress was supposed to write just one full year budget for this year, yet they decided to only write a budget through December 15th and skip out of town. So you look at the individuals who are going to represent you now, one of the first things they're going to do when they get back in is actually try and figure out how we're going to fill the current remaining of the fiscal year. Also, when we look at our annual budget, we run a deficit. And if you also take a look at our national debt, we're in a curve now where we get out to catastrophic levels where debt becomes a percentage of our GDP. Our GDP becomes a high percentage of our debt. This is what we need. We need individuals to go in and actually work hard and tie themselves to a plan. As is right now, we don't have a plan, so we just engage in fiscal nonsense every year where we argue backwards and forth. Simpson Bowl was that template. I spent a year working on it. We have a lot of consensus on it. It's got 4 parts. If someone isn't telling you that they're going to actually work very hard on 3 of the parts, because we actually enacted one of the parts. One of the parts that we actually enacted was controlling discretionary spending and cutting the overall rate. In 2011, we passed the Budget Control Act, and we said that we were going to cut back on net discretionary spending back about 3 or 4 fiscal years, and then we were going to cap the rate of growth as a percentage of GDP, 3%. We did that. The 3 remaining parts right now is putting someone in place that will actually stand up for a 10-year long-term plan that deals with reforming entitlements, tax reform, tax relief. If they're not talking about that, they're not talking about a 10-year plan, and you're going to be back on the same fiscal nonsense every year.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, I guess I am idealistic. I think that we need to build badly needed coalitions in Congress. Democrats and the Republicans don't talk to each other. Obamacare is a classic example. The Obamacare, there are some parts of it that I really like, and one would be that we have pre-existing conditions that are now covered, and we can keep our children on until they're 26 years old. But it does hurt businesses. It does need to be fixed. There is a remarkable amount of people that have signed up for it, so there are good parts to it. But the Democrats say, we're going to keep it like it is, because the Republicans are saying we've got to repeal and replace. So it's the same thing with the budget, and if we don't get up there and get the coalitions together and get them talking and working together, none of the stuff matters, because if we look back the last, 4 years, 5 years, it's the same stuff. If you vote for a Republican, you're going to get the same thing. If you vote for a Democrat, you're going to get the same thing too.
For once, Gwendolyn, we agree. Yeah, all right. Look, all the non-major party candidates will tell you the exact same thing. I echo it, right? Vote Republican, Democrat, you're going to get a lot of the same stuff. It's going to take someone that's very likely not a Republican, Democrat to go there and bring these yahoos together. Forgive my French, okay? But the more serious thing that I want to touch on, it's budget, it's spending. I think we're kind of missing the boat here when we talk about appropriations bills and the appropriations process. The real boat is this, folks. It's our spending problem and it's our debt problem. Let me give you some context here because I find that helps. In the year 2000, our overall budget, our spending level was 1.7 trillion. This year, 2014, it was 3.5 plus. That means we've doubled spending in 14 years. It took us 224 years to get to the level that we had in 2000. We've doubled it in 14, okay? Now, if you want to talk about debt, it's even worse. In the year 2000, we had about 4.5 trillion in debt. Now, we have close to 18 trillion. We've quadrupled our debt in 14 years. Folks, we have a debt problem, we have a spending problem, and on this side of the race, I'm the only candidate in the race that intends to actually reduce overall spending and pass a balanced budget amendment. Period. That's it. On this side, you got some options. On this side, you really don't if you want a fiscal conservative. Thank you.
Well, there's 2 parts to getting to a balanced budget. I mean, first you have to address the economy. You have to get costs for health care and similar costs under control. That is the first step to getting a balanced budget. The second step is one I think the question was more directed to, is how does Congress come together to achieve a balanced budget. I think it is not going to happen over a short period of time, but it is something we can start and should start working toward. I mentioned that we've balanced 7 budgets in Fairfax County since I've been on the board. In 1 year, we had a $650 million projected deficit and a $3.3 billion budget. We aren't allowed to have deficits, so we had to deal with that $650 million. Congress has to take a similar approach. Focus as if you have to deal with it. What we did in order to resolve a $650 million budget is exactly what Congress needs to do. We came together. There's 10 members on our board. We sat day after day, hour after hour, interviewing the project or the department heads, looking at every way they spend their money, and making decisions, working with you, the community, to prioritize, to make sure that now that we know what they're doing, what can we cut? How can we find efficiencies? And in doing that, we were able to get to a point where we had a budget where all 10 members, Democrats and Republicans, came together and supported that budget. We can do that in Washington.
Mr. Redpath?
This situation is a manifestation of our broken political system. And the root cause of this is single-member plurality voting. Single-member legislative districts, person with the most votes wins. If you have something to write with, write this down, or there's a link on my issues page on my website, which is billredpath.com. But genuinerepresentation.org/Congress. I'll repeat that, genuinerepresentation.org/Congress. And there is a system that is, this is part of something that came out of Harvard MIT Public Disputes Resolution Program. And it gives some examples in there of, for instance, how representatives of the chemical industry and representatives from environmental organizations came together and reached an agreement that satisfied both sides, industry and environmental groups. Everybody was happy with the result. It explains how this happened. The proposal goes to Congress, goes nowhere, goes nowhere. And this is what there is a system here called personally accountable representation that argues that people should be able to select leaders whom they trust to go forward and negotiate on their behalf. And if everybody does this and they respect and know somebody is there negotiating on their point, a wise solution that will be found that everyone will ultimately agree with. genuinerepresentation.org/Congress is a good paper to read. Thank you.
Thank you. Good. I think that's first raspberry we've had tonight. So, good. Okay, this question starts out with Ms. Beck. Do you think the U.S. needs a law that mandates equal pay for equal work?
Thank you. I love this question. Yes. Absolutely. I think if you're doing the same job, you deserve the same pay. And it's just equal rights for women. And I've said it before, my grandmother, mother, aunts, we've all fought hard for our rights, and I think that we need to protect them. Yes, I'll keep it short.
Good. Good, because we want to get one more question in, I think.
Okay, so I definitely agree with the idea of it, no question. But does anyone out there have any idea how that might work? Think about that. If you tried to legislate that, equal pay for equal work, how might that legislation work, right? Just think about it. Well, loopholes, maybe a few, right? Guys, I mean, I want to legislate that everyone is nice to one another, period, because I don't believe in meanness. Who's with me, right? How many loopholes we got there? I mean, just give me a break. Of course, I don't think anyone up here is going to disagree that equal pay for equal work makes perfect sense. It's when you actually try to legislate it that you run down a very slippery slope, and in the end, again, as I pointed out in my earlier comments, in the end, it really just adds a mountain of complexity cost for businesses that they have to deal with, and it actually then discourages them from hiring, right? It actually hurts our economy and hurts employment. It's not going to help it. Looks great, it sounds great, it's fantastic politics for the Democrats, but it's not going to solve the problem. Thanks.
Mr. Faust?
I absolutely support equal pay for equal work, and it is something that can and should be legislated. We have laws on the books now that require that equal pay, but there's no way to enforce them. People don't know what the person next to them is making, and if they find out or if they ask, they are at risk of being fired. There's legislation pending that will solve these problems and make it more equitable in the workforce so that you can find out if they're violating your rights to equal pay. So I support that. I do want to say, since our opponent, Ms. Comstock's not here, she has said on MSNBC that equal pay for equal work is an agenda of the left wing. That is ridiculous. This is something that should be every woman's right, every person's right to be paid equally for equal work, and I support it.
Mr. Redpath.
I heard recently someone say about income inequality, which is a hot topic these days. They said that there's only one thing worse than income inequality, and that's trying to do something about it. And I think that's true. Here we go again. I bet there's never been one regulation of business that wasn't passed with good intent. There is this, in economics, there is the seen and the unseen. And just like the minimum wage, this sounds good, but then, when you begin peeling back the layers of the onion, how is this going to be enforced? What problems might there be? It might be that people are willing to accept a lower wage, be they men or women, if they have more flexibility, can have flexible hours, work at home. This should be a negotiation that occurs between voluntarily, because one thing, once you begin, libertarians are conservative on economic issues and liberal on social issues because there is one core theme. We want to reduce the use of government coercion in society. Government has a monopoly on the legitimate use of force in this society, and if we are going to be a free society, both in our personal lives and our economic lives, we need to minimize the use of that force, even when it is ostensibly going to accomplish something good in the eyes of some people.
Mr. Eichholt.
Once again, I would say that discriminating against women, and that would include not paying them the same amount as a man for equal work, is already illegal. I don't think, I have to agree with my libertarian friends here, I don't think another law is going to help the situation any more than we already have. And I have to disagree with something I heard Mr. Faust say, which was there was a law passed and it solved the problem. There are so many unintended consequences, which, again, the libertarians touched on, by passing a law that says you have to pay a woman exactly the same amount for exactly the same amount of work. The amount of work it would take for every business now to verify to the federal government that they are doing that, the cost of that would be enormous, I would think. So, in my estimation, I don't think we need another law. I think the law is already there. If you're being discriminated on, your pay is being discriminated against because you are a woman, then that is already a problem. Thank you.
Well, for ages, women have been paid about 75 cents to the men, what men earn for their dollar. So the Paycheck Fairness Act, which is pending in Congress, there are different loopholes that have been in effect with the current law, and that's all that they're trying to do is to take care of the loopholes so that women, in these efforts to try to for equality.
So I guess my first question would be, why should we let the government determine pay? Why should we let the government determine how much anyone gets paid? I don't believe that's anywhere in the Constitution. There's also just some sort of practical implications. In my office, I know that I'm the hardest working employee, but sometimes my manager doesn't know that. And sometimes my coworkers think they're the hardest working employees. There's actually a bit of dispute. How could we expect the government to know who's working the hardest, who deserves some level of money? It's just ridiculous. It's impossible to implement. And further, we have a market system in this country where good companies will thrive and bad companies will fail. Companies that are not adequately rewarding their employees are at a disadvantage. Those employees, be they women or seniors or anyone, can leave and get better jobs. I have two sisters who both own their own businesses and are wildly successful. It is possible. And this is also one opportunity for the Greens to up the Libertarians. I think this is where the Libertarians fail. We support universal health care. If we had universal health care in this country, it would be easier to leave your job and start your own business. In fact, it would reduce friction. It'd be much better for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. The question, specifically pay equity, if you will. Two questions, really, that people don't really like to address head on, and we talked about a little bit here right now. One of them. One particularly is do we have laws against discrimination and bias in pay? Sure we do. We have these laws to protect against discrimination in your pay based on age, gender, race, or ethnicity. The second part of that is when you look into the workforce, there's an untalked about bias out there the way the employers, and it's the organization, whether it's a man or a woman running the organization, begins to look at the workforce. And that workforce is the fact when they look at a man, they make a projection that over the life he's going to continue to be with that corporation, so he's an investment. They look at a woman and they say it's very likely that at some point in time if she comes in at a certain age, she's going to leave the workforce, she's going to leave that job, probably because she's going to have a child. So that question right there is something that is an untracked bias that no one likes to talk about, and that the real thing is trying to look at solutions so that for women that want to navigate in and out of the workforce, how do you remove those barriers that makes it easier for her to come back into the workforce? And that is what we're talking about right there more than anything else. Everything else is just political and people want to talk about this, that, and the other, but the discrimination factors, their rights are on the books. But that untalked about bias and a long-term investment of employees is something no one wants to really address. And those barriers are real, and those things need to be dealt with. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I believe I've done the whole round, right? Okay. All right, we only have a few minutes left, and I'm going to mess up your broadcasting, Jim, because I'm just going to pass the microphone from one to another. I'm going to give you a little second to think about this. Everyone here would be a freshman representative. To what committee would you most like to have an appointment when you get to the Hill?
Well, my major issues are war and healthcare and ecology. Oh, one committee?
What's your most?
So, I guess how we spend our money in this country, financial.
The House Intel Committee might be nice. You might get a little more information on what's going on with our wars. But again, it doesn't really matter. My priority is legalizing drugs, ending wars, making available single-payer health care. Those are achievable with or without the committees. Thank you.
Thank you. My priorities, again, is making sure that we put in place a long-term stable budget that ends uncertainty and allows us to grow our economy. The investments that I like to make as we set priorities in that budget are education, transportation infrastructure, and national defense. Two committees that are going to be the biggest impact players in doing that, as well as the biggest impact for the 8th District, are going to be sitting on the Armed Services Committee, committee that I've already staffed for, so I have the most experience for that to be effective day one, and the second one's going to be Ways and Means. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. One.
Okay. Science, space, and technology. I think here in Northern Virginia, this is what we need, is all the new technologies. It's going to help the environment. There's a lot of very exciting innovations in the world, and I think that we need to look at them. We need to implement them. We need to figure out how to get these companies to Northern Virginia. We need to figure out a way to be energy independent and have clean energy. And I think by sitting on this committee, I can certainly lend my educational background to helping pick out the best technologies that we should get behind as a country and having them here in Northern Virginia.
Thank you.
Do we still have 90 seconds for these, or?
30 seconds.
Oh, well, shoot. Okay. House Armed Services. Again, I'm a former Army captain, Iraq vet, been to the region multiple times. I really think my experience there would make an impact, and with me being on the Hill and me being on that committee. So I think first and foremost, it would be House Armed Services. My priorities, since I have 10 seconds, reducing spending and passing a balanced budget amendment, ending the drug war. I'm with Jerry on that one. And finally, pursuing a non-interventionist foreign policy. Thanks, guys. Have a great evening.
Mr. Faust. Mr. Faust.
My priorities would be jobs and creating jobs and opportunity, investing in the types of things that do that, like education, infrastructure, research and development. So, in terms of committee assignments, I would be interested in transportation and infrastructure, science and technology, and workforce and education. If they give me one of those three, I'll be happy.
I presume the Appropriations Committee, whatever committee is responsible for addressing entitlements, we have to address the entitlement crisis in this nation that is forthcoming, that if we don't address it soon, it is going to lead to an existential debt crisis in this nation sometime in the future, maybe in the 20s, maybe in the 30s. We might make it to the 40s, but I doubt it. But I would say whatever committee deals with entitlements.
As the last speaker, I'm going to apologize. I'm going to do my first politician thing, and I'm going to completely ignore the question. As November 4th approaches, I ask one thing of you. Do not focus on the differences between John Faust and Barbara Comstock in the 10th District. Focus on the difference between John Faust and every other Democrat in Congress and Barbara Comstock and every other Republican, and ask yourself, do you want your representative to be just one more voice screaming across the partisan divide in Washington, or do you want somebody whose goal is to build consensus and try to solve problems? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give all our candidates a big round of applause.